The teacup was still warm in her hands when Monik's life changed forever. She was just a waitress, tired and unnoticed. But when she saved Madam Flora, the feared Korean Mafia boss's mother, everything shifted. Before her son could refuse, Monik was officially declared the future daughter-in-law. From survival tests, secret threats, and dangerous rivals to tension, loyalty, and a slow-burning romance with Masain, Monik's story is full of drama and suspense. Watch as a simple act of courage turns into a life she never imagined, and a world where a mother's word is more dangerous than a loaded gun. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more thrilling mafia stories and shocking plot twists. The tray trembled in my hands, and I hated that it did. In the Crystal Orchid Lounge, weakness had a smell, cheap perfume, stale fear, and the kind of sweat that came from knowing you didn't belong. I'd learned to breathe shallow here, to move like a shadow between silk dresses and tailored suits worth more than my mother's rent. "Table 9, Manager Kwon whispered, not looking at me. He never did. "Be quick, important guests." Important means dangerous. I smoothed my apron and walked toward the private section where the lights turned softer and the air grew heavier. 2 men in black stood outside the carved mahogany doors, earpieces coiled like sleeping snakes. One of them scanned me as if I were already guilty of something. Inside, the room smelled of ginseng tea and old money. She was sitting at the center, small, elegant, wrapped in a pearl-gray hanbok. The Korean Mafia boss mother. Everyone in Seoul knew her face even if they pretended not to. Around her, men spoke in low voices, careful voices, the kind used near cliffs. I kept my eyes down and set the teapot beside her cup. That's when it happened. Her fingers began to shake. At first, I thought it was age. Then the teacup rattled against the saucer, a thin, desperate sound that no one else seemed to hear over the polite laughter. Her lips parted, but no words came out, only a sharp, broken breath. I recognized it immediately. My father had died making that same sound. "Ma'am," I whispered before I could stop myself. The men were still talking business, territories, shipments, names that tasted like blood. None of them noticed the old woman clawing at her chest. Training took over, not waitress training, life training. I dropped the tray. Porcelain shattered like a gunshot. Chairs scraped, someone cursed, but I was already beside her, loosening the tight collar of her hanbok, forcing her to breathe with me. "Ambulance," I said, louder than I'd ever spoken in that place. "Now." The Mafia boss turned to me then, the son everyone feared. His eyes were cold, calculating, already deciding who would pay for this disruption. For a second, I thought he would throw me out himself. Instead, his mother grabbed my wrist. Her grip was shockingly strong. She stared at me as if memorizing my soul, then at her son, and with a voice thin but unbreakable, she said the words that split my life in two. "This girl is my daughter-in-law." The room went silent. Even the air seemed afraid to move. I felt every gaze slice toward me, the waitress with wet hands and a name no one important had ever bothered to learn. The boss looked between his mother and me, disbelief hardening into something darker. He opened his mouth to refuse, but she squeezed my wrist again. And in their world, a mother's decision was not a suggestion. It was a command. The room stayed frozen long after Madam Flora spoke. Monik could still feel the old woman's fingers wrapped around her wrist, warm, fragile, and impossibly powerful. Around them, men who looked carved from stone avoided breathing too loudly. Even the bodyguards at the door had lowered their eyes. Only Masain moved. The Mafia boss stepped forward, slow, deliberate, like a storm deciding where to strike. His gaze traveled from his mother's face to Monik's apron, to the broken porcelain bleeding tea across the floor. "Mother," he said carefully, "you're in shock." "I am in clarity," Madam Flora replied. Monik wished the ground would open and swallow her. 10 minutes ago, she had been worrying about rent and her little brother's school fees. Now she was standing in the center of a family she had only heard about in whispers. Mossane finally looked at her directly. Up close he was worse than the rumors. Too calm, too controlled, eyes that weighed people the way other men weighed gold. "Name," he ordered. "Monik," she answered before remembering she was supposed to be invisible. "Monik what?" She hesitated. Waitresses didn't give full names to men like him, but Madam Flora squeezed her wrist again, encouraging, trusting. "Monik Adami." A murmur passed through the room. Foreign, outsider, not one of them. Mossane noticed it too. "You dropped a tray and suddenly you are my bride." His voice was soft, dangerous. "Explain." Before she could answer, Madam Flora lifted her chin. "This girl saw what none of you did," the old woman said. "While my son discussed money, she saw a life leaving my body. That is the kind of eyes a family needs." Monik's throat tightened. Family. The word felt too big for someone who lived in a single room with peeling paint and a leaking roof. Mossane studied her again, slower this time, not as a waitress, but as a problem he needed to solve. "Leave us," he told the others. Chairs scraped. Men vanished like obedient ghosts. The doors closed with a final, expensive click. Suddenly the room felt smaller, the air thinner. "You saved my mother," Mossane said. "For that I will pay any price, money, a house, a new life, name it." Monik almost laughed. That was the dream, wasn't it? A rich man offering escape. But Madame Flora spoke before she could. "She will have our name." Silence hit harder than a slap. Mossane turned to his mother. "You cannot decide my wife like a piece of furniture." "I already have." His jaw tightened. For the first time, Monik saw a crack in the perfect Mafia mask. Fear, maybe, or something close to it. He looked back at her. "Do you understand what she is demanding of you, Monik Adami?" "No. Not even a little." But with Madame Flora's hand, still holding hers, Monik realized one terrifying truth. Whatever this family wanted, they never asked twice. The corridor outside Madame Flora's private room smelled faintly of jasmine and gunpowder, a combination Monik would never forget. She clutched her apron, trying to make herself smaller, invisible. But invisibility had abandoned her the moment Madame Flora had claimed her. Mossane followed, silent, steps measured, eyes sharp as knives. The closer he came, the more Monik realized she had no idea how to survive this moment. The hallway stretched endlessly, but every polished tile echoed her fear. "You're quiet," Mossane said finally, voice calm but edged with steel. "I expected you to scream, faint, beg, or run. None of that happened." I didn't know what to do," Monik admitted, her throat dry. "Your mother, she was dying." Mossane stopped and studied her, as if weighing each word. "That is true, but truth alone does not impress me. Anyone can panic, anyone can act. Not everyone survives or lives to be chosen." Monik swallowed hard. "I don't want to be chosen. I was just trying to help." He tilted his head, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "Ah, honesty, courage, that's dangerous in this world. Do you understand that?" Before she could answer, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression darkened. She caught a glimpse, a warning from one of his lieutenants. Someone had already spread rumors that an outsider, a waitress, had been declared the Mafia family's future daughter-in-law. "They're talking," Mossane muttered, his voice low. "The wrong people, rivals, old enemies, they see a weakness in my mother's choice and in me for allowing it." Monik felt the weight of it immediately. She hadn't just saved a life. She had stepped into a battlefield she didn't understand. "You have no idea what you've done," he said, almost to himself. Then louder, "You will not move until I know who you really are. Every friend, every skill, every secret. I need to know that you are not a threat." Monik's heart thudded. I don't understand. I'm just a waitress, that's it." Mossane's eyes narrowed. "Just a waitress. You didn't hesitate. You knew what to do. That is not just anything. I will find out everything about you, Monik Adami, and if I find a lie, you will regret crossing me." A door opened behind them. Madam Flora appeared, serene and unshakable, her pearl-gray hanbok flawless. You're testing her, son, she said softly, but with undeniable authority. She is not your enemy. She is my choice. Protect her or you will answer to me. Masane's jaw tightened. The rare flicker of anger crossed his features, but he lowered his gaze. Yes, mother. Monik felt the gravity of the family's rules crash over her. She wasn't just a guest in this world anymore. She was a target, a prize, and a liability all at once. And the Mafia boss standing beside her, the man who could crush her in a heartbeat, was not yet sure if she would survive or if he wanted her to. Monik had never imagined a kitchen could feel like a battlefield. The day after Madam Flora's declaration, she returned to the Crystal Orchid Lounge, not to serve tea, but to gather her things. Every step toward the exit was weighed with unease. Every waiter and guest who glanced at her looked like a potential threat. Leaving so soon? Manager Kwon asked, his voice tight, hands trembling as he passed her the folded apron. She didn't say you could go. Monik swallowed. I need to think. You don't get to think, Monik, someone said from behind. She froze. It was Ma Sane. He was dressed simply, black shirt, fitted pants, but his presence alone bent the air. Guards parted instinctively as he approached. He didn't smile, didn't scold. He just looked at her, eyes scanning, calculating, as though measuring her worth with a glance. Your life is no longer yours, he said. You saved my mother. That action changes everything. But in this family, gratitude comes with a price. Monik's pulse quickened. She had expected a thank you, maybe a cautious nod. She had not expected a sentence that sounded like a verdict. What price? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. You will live under our roof, he said. Learn the rules, observe the family, follow Madam Flora's orders. You will not speak unless spoken to. Her stomach twisted. And if I refuse? You won't. His voice was steady. You have no choice, not here, not with me. She looked down at her hands, small and trembling, and realized he wasn't lying. She hadn't just saved a life, she had stepped into a world where power was absolute, and disobedience meant death. Madam Flora appeared at the doorway, serene as always. Monik, she said softly, I saved you once. Now it is your turn to survive in this family. The house is dangerous, but you must trust me, trust him. Trust? Monik's mind screamed at her to run, to vanish into the streets, to forget the teacup, the ambulance, the moment that had turned her life upside down. But she couldn't. The gratitude she had felt toward Madam Flora's mother suddenly felt heavy, almost like chains. She had saved a life, and now her life belonged to a family she didn't understand. Ma Sane studied her, then stepped closer. If you make a single mistake, he warned, you'll learn the true cost of gratitude. This isn't a reward, it's a contract. One misstep and you will wish you had stayed a waitress. Monik nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She understood now. Saving Madam Flora had been simple. Surviving her family, that was the real challenge. She followed them through the black doors into the heart of the mansion. Guards flanked the corridors, portraits of ancestors glared down from gilded frames, and the distant hum of the city reminded her that outside, life was ordinary, and here, it was anything but. This was her new world, dangerous, unforgiving, and she had no choice but to obey or die. The mansion was enormous, yet each room felt like a trap. Every door had guards outside, every hallway had cameras, even shadows seemed to listen. Monik felt her heart hammer as she followed Madam Flora and Ma Sane deeper into the estate. This is your new life, Madam Flora said calmly. You are no longer a guest. You are part of this family. Obey, observe, survive. Monik nodded, gripping her bag. Her mind raced. I just wanted to serve tea. Ma Sane was silent, walking slightly behind them. His gaze never left her, scanning for hesitation, weakness, lies. Every time she flinched, she felt the weight of his judgment. You will learn the rules first, Madam Flora continued. 1, never raise your voice. 2, never refuse an order. 3, never betray trust. She paused, letting her words sink in. And 4, no one is more dangerous than the one who seems harmless. Remember that. Monik swallowed. Yes, ma'am. They entered a large sitting room, richly decorated, every piece of furniture hand-picked and expensive beyond comprehension. Mosaine moved to a cabinet and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table toward Monik. "What is this?" she asked, glancing at the folder. "Your profile," he said, voice calm yet razor-sharp. "We have already begun background checks. Family, friends, skills, habits. You will answer everything truthfully. One lie and the consequences will be unpleasant." Monik's stomach dropped. She had expected training in etiquette or house rules, not a full-scale investigation into her entire life. I don't have much to hide," she said. Mosaine's eyes narrowed. "We shall see." Madam Flora leaned closer, her gaze softening. "Monik, you saved me. That is why I claimed you. But my son, he is cautious for a reason. He does not forgive easily. You must prove your worth not to me, but to him." Monik felt the truth hit her like a wave. In this house, survival meant more than obedience. It meant strategy, awareness, and constant vigilance. Mosaine finally spoke again, voice lower, personal. "You will not leave this room until I am convinced you understand the rules. Speak, act, breathe carefully. One mistake and I will not protect you. Only my mother can do that." The words made her chest tighten. She realized that every glance, every movement, every breath would be scrutinized from now on. Hours passed. Monik repeated names, memorized floor layouts, and studied family portraits, every one of them a silent reminder of power and history. By the end of the day, exhaustion weighed her down, but something else had taken root: awareness. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a player in a dangerous game, and the stakes were life, loyalty, and love she hadn't even realized was forming. As she lay on the thin guest mattress in her new room, she could hear Mosaine walking the halls. She knew one thing for certain: every step he took echoed his authority and his attention. And she wasn't sure if that was comforting or terrifying. The morning sun barely touched the mansion's marble floors when Monik woke. Her muscles ached from yesterday's long day of memorizing layouts, names, and rules. Yet sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford, not here. Breakfast was silent. Madam Flora sat at the head of the table, regal and poised, while Mosaine's presence hovered over Monik like a shadow she could neither escape nor ignore. "You will serve," Madam Flora said softly, "but observe. The first test of your loyalty begins today." Monik nodded, trembling slightly as she poured tea into the delicate cups. Every movement was scrutinized, Mosaine's eyes sharp and unwavering, guards whispering behind doors, each servant waiting for her to slip. Then it came. A man she had never seen before stepped into the room. Tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that didn't just look at you, but weighed you. "Mr. Han," Madam Flora said calmly, "meet Monik. Today you will see whether she belongs in this house." Monik's stomach tightened. She didn't understand what this test entailed. But the man, Mr. Han, didn't waste time. He leaned slightly toward her. "A simple task," he said, voice smooth but deadly. "Carry this message to the outer guards, memorize their positions, and return without error. Fail, and your mistake will not be forgiven." Monik swallowed, nodding. She knew the words weren't empty threats. Mosaine had made that clear yesterday. She accepted the note, careful not to wrinkle it, and began walking through the mansion. Every hallway, every corridor, every shadow felt alive. She noticed things she hadn't before: cameras tucked in corners, guards whispering through earpieces, exit doors she hadn't memorized. By the time she returned, Monik's palms were slick with sweat. She handed the note back, her heart hammering. Mosaine stepped forward, silent, watching her. Then he glanced at Madam Flora. "She passed," Madam Flora said softly, voice like silk. Mosaine's eyes didn't relax. Perhaps, but passing a test doesn't guarantee survival. Monik's throat tightened. She realized this was just the beginning. Every favor, every act of courage, every word she spoke would be measured against an invisible scale of loyalty and competence. One misstep, and she wouldn't have Madam Flora's protection. That night, in her small room at the edge of the mansion, she replayed every movement of the day. She had survived. She had passed. but the awareness of danger pressed against her chest like iron bands. Then, a soft knock at the door. Masane's voice, calm but low. Do not think the day's tests end at sunset. Loyalty is a living thing, it grows, and it is never fully earned. Monik's heart leapt. She didn't know whether to be terrified or thrilled. One thing was certain. In this house, every day was a test, and Monica Damey had only just begun. The mansion never slept. Monik quickly learned that the silence of night was only an illusion. Whispers slid through hallways, footsteps echoed behind locked doors, and cameras followed her every move. That evening, after dinner, Monik was sent to deliver a stack of ledgers to Madam Flora's study. The air was thick with incense, and the soft glow of lanterns cast long shadows along the ornate walls. She moved carefully, aware that one misstep could mean suspicion, or worse. As she approached the study, she caught sight of a figure slipping into the shadows outside the balcony. Her stomach twisted. Instinct told her this wasn't just a servant. Someone was watching. Monik. The voice made her start. Masane stepped from the shadows, expression unreadable. He didn't move closer, but the aura of authority pressed down on her like a physical weight. You saw that, didn't you? He asked quietly, eyes narrowed. Yes, she admitted, heart racing. Someone was out there watching the house. He nodded, a faint smirk tugging at his lips, though his eyes remained cold. Good, you noticed. Awareness keeps people alive here. Most wouldn't see a threat until it's too late. Monik followed him into the study. Madam Flora sat at her desk, reviewing papers, but her gaze was serene and unshakable. There is unrest in the Northern Territories, Madam Flora said without looking up. Rival families believe my son's inattention is weakness. They'll test us soon. And your presence, Monik, complicates matters further. Monik's heart thudded. She had expected danger in abstract terms, shadows, whispers, threats. But now it felt close, tangible, like a cold hand brushing her shoulder. Masane's voice was low, almost a growl. We need to know if you can act under pressure, protect my mother, survive, and follow orders no matter the risk. Monik's throat went dry. I will do whatever I can. Words mean nothing, he said. Actions do. For the next hour, they drilled her in emergency procedures, routes of escape, code words, safe rooms. Monik's hands shook, but her mind sharpened. She realized survival wasn't just about courage, it was about precision, observation, and quick thinking. Finally, Masane stepped closer, their eyes locking. One mistake, he said quietly, and no one in this house, not even your mother, will protect you. Monik swallowed hard, but beneath the fear a strange thrill stirred. Danger had become a pulse, and in this pulse she felt alive. That night, alone in her room, Monik replayed the shadows, the whispers, the sudden glances of guards, and Masane's piercing gaze. She understood now. The mansion was alive, and it would test her every day. But more importantly, she realized something else. Masane's attention wasn't just about control. It was watchful, calculating, almost protective. And somewhere deep in her chest, a spark of curiosity flickered. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was learning the rules of this dangerous, intoxicating world, and she might just be beginning to understand her place in it. The mansion was quieter than usual when Monik awoke, but silence in a place like this was rarely a blessing. Monik, a voice whispered outside her door. It was Masane. She opened the door cautiously and he stepped in, expression unreadable. Northern families have made their move. They believe my mother's choice has weakened us. They will test your loyalty tonight. Her heart skipped a beat. Test me. Yes, he said flatly, and failing is not an option. By sunset, the mansion buzzed with tense energy. Guards patrolled the grounds in tighter formations, doors were locked more securely, and Madam Flora moved with the calm authority of someone who had seen threats and survived them all. You saved my life, Madam Flora said quietly to Monik as she passed. Now you must prove it again, protect this house. Monik nodded, trying to swallow the knot of fear in her throat. This was no longer a test of courage, it was survival. The first intruder appeared just after midnight. A shadow slipped past the northern wall, and Monik, stationed with the outer guards, noticed immediately. Her hands went cold, but she remembered every step of the drills Masain had taught her. She moved silently, signaling the guards with subtle gestures. The intruder froze under their collective gaze and was swiftly restrained. Monik's pulse raced as she realized the magnitude of what had just happened. Her observation had prevented disaster. Masain appeared beside her, silent at first, then spoke, voice low. "You saw the threat before anyone else. That is why you remain alive." Monik swallowed hard. I just followed instructions." "No," he said sharply, eyes locking with hers. "You acted. That is what matters. Survival is earned through action, not hesitation." Later in the main hall, Madam Flora addressed the entire family. "This night proved what I have known since I first saw her. Monik is not a mere outsider. She is part of this family, whether you like it or not." Masain, standing silently at the side, finally gave her a glance, brief, sharp, and unreadable. Monik felt a shiver run down her spine, protective, intimidating, unyielding. As the night wound down, Monik found herself alone in the guest room, heart still hammering. She had survived her first real threat, and in the process had earned a sliver of respect from Masain. But the danger was far from over. Rival families would not give up. And in a house ruled by power, loyalty, and fear, Monik understood that her life, and her claim as Madam Flora's daughter-in-law, depended on her wits, courage, and every lesson she had learned so far. Outside, shadows moved silently, watching. The mansion's pulse beat with tension. And Monik, now more alert than ever, realized that the world she had entered was merciless, and she had no choice but to master it. The night was heavy with rain, the kind that drummed against the mansion windows like impatient fingers. Monik sat in her small room, staring at the faint shadows on the wall, when a soft knock came at the door. "Enter," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. Masain stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a deliberate click. No guards, no announcements, just him, and the weight of the mansion's unspoken rules pressing down on her. "You've done well with the intruder tonight," he said, voice low, even. "But observation alone is not enough. Survival here requires absolute trust, and you've yet to prove it." Monik's pulse quickened. "Trust, what do you mean?" He walked slowly toward her, eyes never leaving hers. "I mean this. I need to know that if I give you a command, one that risks your life, you will obey without hesitation. That you understand the consequences of failure and still act correctly." Her stomach twisted. She had survived threats before, but now she understood the stakes personally. One wrong move, one hesitation, and she could die, even under Madam Flora's protection. What kind of command?" she asked. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope, sliding it across the desk toward her. "Inside are instructions for a critical task. You will complete it tonight. Alone. Any deviation or failure is unacceptable." Monik's hands shook as she opened it. The task required navigating the mansion's most sensitive areas, guarded halls, surveillance blind spots, and sections only Masain and Madame Flora could enter. She realized the test wasn't just about courage. It was about trust, intelligence, and composure under pressure. "I can do this," she said, though her voice trembled. He studied her. "You will do this. No excuses, no hesitation. Your life and your place in this family depends on it." Hours later, Monik moved through the mansion with silent precision, carrying out every step of the instructions. She dodged patrols, anticipated shadows, and delivered the required items exactly where they needed to be. Every heartbeat screamed danger, but she trusted her instincts and what Masain had taught her. When she returned, Masain waited in the study, arms crossed. She placed the items on the desk without a word. "Good," he said simply. His eyes softened just slightly. "You acted without hesitation. You proved your loyalty and your intelligence. Not everyone survives a test like this. Most fail." Monik exhaled, finally allowing herself to relax. Does this mean I've earned your trust?" Mossane leaned closer, his voice low, a subtle edge of something unspoken in it. Trust is earned daily, but tonight you've taken the first step. As he turned to leave, Monik felt an unfamiliar warmth stir in her chest. Respect, gratitude, something sharper, something dangerous. In this house, survival had a price, and Monik realized it was slowly becoming intertwined with something far more complicated: desire. Outside, the rain continued to fall, each drop against the window a reminder. Danger and loyalty were inseparable in the world she now called home. And she had survived, but the greatest challenges and revelations were yet to come. The mansion was silent, but the tension inside was palpable. Monik stood in the grand hall, every muscle coiled, aware that tonight could decide everything: her survival, her place in the family, and perhaps even her future with Mossane. Tonight, Madam Flora's voice rang from the top of the stairs, calm and commanding. We face those who dare to challenge our family, and you, Monik, will prove why you belong here. Monik swallowed, clutching the small dagger Mossane had reluctantly allowed her to carry. It wasn't for offense, it was for survival. Every hallway could conceal an enemy, every shadow a threat. She had never felt more alive or more terrified. Then the sound came, the soft scrape of boots on marble. Rivals had infiltrated the perimeter, testing the mansion's defenses. Guards moved to intercept, but Monik spotted a small group attempting to sneak past them. Her instincts kicked in. She alerted the nearest guard with a subtle signal she had practiced endlessly under Mossane's scrutiny. The guards intercepted the intruders, and in moments, the threat was neutralized. Mossane appeared beside her, silent as a shadow. He watched her carefully, expression unreadable. "You handled that well," he said quietly, almost approving. "Most would panic, most would fail." Monik felt a surge of pride, but kept her focus. "I just did what needed to be done," she said. "No," he replied, voice low, intent. "You acted, you observed, you protected. That is the difference between surviving and existing in this world." Madam Flora descended the stairs, her gaze sweeping the hall. "Monik," she said, voice steady, commanding attention even in the chaos, "you saved lives tonight. You protected this house and honored the trust I placed in you. From this moment forward, you are officially part of this family, my daughter-in-law." The words hit Monik like sunlight after a storm. She looked at Mossane, whose expression softened, though only slightly. For the first time, he allowed a faint trace of a smile. "You've earned it," he said, voice measured. "Not because of my mother's choice, but because of your courage, intelligence, and loyalty. Remember, life in this house is never easy, but you have proven that you belong." Monik nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. The fear that had gripped her since the day she saved Madam Flora began to lift, replaced by something warmer: pride, relief, and a hint of hope. Mossane stepped closer, his presence magnetic, almost intimidating. "And do not mistake survival for weakness," he said softly, just for her. "You have survived, but now you will thrive." Madam Flora's eyes met his briefly, then turned back to Monik. "Family is more than blood. It is loyalty, courage, and trust. You have all three. Welcome home." The mansion seemed to exhale with relief. Guards relaxed, shadows receded, and for the first time, Monik felt a sense of belonging. She had entered this world as a timid waitress, and now she stood as a recognized member of one of Seoul's most dangerous and powerful families. As she looked at Mossane, she realized something else. The danger was far from gone, but so was her fear. She was no longer merely surviving, she had earned her place. And in the shadows of this powerful house, Monik Ademi had finally become part of something greater than herself.